another edition of The Big Picture. This is episode 21. Yes, episode 21 of The Big Picture. My name is John Allen Namu.
I'm Justin Wanda.
Oh,
I was trying to remember if it's 21 and if it's
22.
Yeah, it is 22, yeah.
Oh, it's 22,
22, right, Felix?
So why didn't you correct anyway?
Yeah.
So that's why I was telling you.
No, you said 20. You said 22. Say with your chest.
I'm Justin Wanda.
Tom?
I'm Tom Mukwana.
Yeah, and today on the show, we are discussing the finance bill. Obviously, it's June, and this is an important month, not just for Kenya, but for East Africa. All East African economies are going to be presenting their finance bills this month. And to do justice to this discussion, we have someone in here who can cut through the fiscal fog. He's one of Africa's sharpest business minds, reporting from Nairobi to Davos, from Bangui to Beijing, from Karioko to what's another place with a K?
Shanghai.
Shanghai doesn't have a K, my guy.
Connected, man.
Wait.
Okay,
No.
but anyway, yeah,
Spoiling my alliteration here. Ramanyang, journalist with CGTN, Bloomberg, all-around good guy, and he's been on our screens, in our ears for now well over a decade, right?
Over a decade now.
It's going to 2 decades almost. Aye. Anyway, it's rarefied there, you know. When you reach there, you'll understand the vibes here. Anyway,
you guys lose count.
You stop counting.
You stop counting.
After 10 years. I've been away 2 weeks. The Madarao in here is so thick. Anyway,
so we'll form a union.
Yes.
Millennials United.
Yeah, exactly. Millennials United. Ramanyang, thank you and welcome to The Big Picture.
Asante sana.
Rama, this is an interesting month for us, obviously, not just for the ordinary, what would have been in past years, a month in which, business journalists take to the front and analyze the finance bill, analyze what the economy looks like, and what it's going to look like. Obviously, last year's added some important significance and context to what's happening this year, right? And I'm sure you've had a chance to look at the finance bill, 2025, 2026, the budget estimates, etc. And the first question I have isn't so much one of economics, but one of, I guess, taking the political temperatures of the country. Does it to you look like this finance bill is more about balancing a difficult economy to balance, or about reconciliation with a public that very, very loudly told the government that they don't like what was presented last year?
I would say it's neither. It's the way Parliament and the Finance Ministry have tried to present this finance bill. Initially was, this is a reconciliatory bill, we're not raising any new taxes, right? That's all. It's a one line that the Finance Minister, John Badi, keeps going back to, we're not raising taxes, not raising taxes, not raising taxes. And in one sense, you could say, well, yeah, that sort of tracks with the numbers, because it's not raising the absolute headline rates on certain things. So, for example, we're not seeing another tax hike on an increase in the top rates of personal tax or corporate income taxes, right? So, in that sense, yes. But the fundamental problem is this finance bill continues down what, strictly speaking, is it's a pretty dangerous path that we've been on for the last decade, where we know that we don't have access to pools of cheap capital that we can just borrow from, which is basically what Henry Rotich did in the first Jubilee term.
Yeah.
And we also do not have, what makes it even worse now is we've spent the last 10, 12, 13 years decimating the private sector, impeding the ability of companies to grow, to hire people, to invest. And the pool of disposable income that we all have as Kenyans has shrunk dramatically. And the way we would talk about it on the desk is to say, well, if you look at the data in terms of real wages, so essentially you take whatever your income is on average, because KRA has this data across agriculture, manufacturing, anyone in formal employment, because we all file our returns, right? You take all of that data on how much you are paid in a year, add it all up, then you average it out. And you essentially adjust that for the effect of inflation, right? And then you arrive at what you'll hear is the real wage, right? So that basically measures what the actual purchasing power of your 1,000 bob note is. The reality is, if you look at what has happened in the last 5 years, 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, that's 5 straight years in which our disposable income has contracted, right? Every single year. So we're poorer now than we were, say, in 2018 or even 2018, if you want to go back that far, which is deeply problematic. Now, in that sort of environment, if Tom has a smaller pool of income available and I'm raising his taxes,
and it's a sensitive one there, Tom, because now he's going to start asking me for a raise.
Yes.
Example. Let's use a general term like bio.
but that's exactly what is going to happen,
Yes.
right? Because that dynamic it's exactly what is playing out in millions and millions of companies, right? SMEs, larger firms across this country. Not just this year, it's played out last year, it's played out in 2023. So for us to continue on that same path of saying, well, you know, we'll just keep taxes where they are, we're going to tinker at the margins, and I'm sure we'll go into details on that later. That's not productive, in my view. I don't think we are decisively saying, you know what, we're on the wrong course, we need to change.
Course correct.
Yeah, we need to course correct.
Actually, on that, because you touch at something that's very close to my heart. I look at Africa Uncensored both as, you know, a social enterprise in a sense because of the kind of work that we do here, but also there's a bottom line that I'm faced with looking at every month, every few weeks, etc. And you're right. For us to be able to keep up with inflation, you know, with our raises, etc., we have to do a lot of work. We have to cover a lot of ground just to tread water, and it gets me asking the question constantly, like, what is William Ruto's priority, like economic priority for this country? Can you divine from what his finance bills over the past 3 years have been, especially now this one, what William Ruto's priority is for coming years and for businesses like Africa Uncensored, smaller businesses, because as you said, SMEs are the ones that are going to be hardest hit by this finance bill.
Can I just say before
Yes.
he answers?
Yes.
I think his entire priority is for us to be poorer, and he's doing well. It's so magical. Like
You see,
we have
Justine,
less money.
Justine, this is why I didn't ask you. I was coming to you. I had special questions for you, but
Okay.
but you know what? Given that's true, I feel like all of us are feeling it, and maybe something that we can discuss also a little later is how this finance bill, as I've read it, it feels different from last year's in that last year's felt personal, of course, because of the kind of taxes that were being applied, felt like they applied to me personally. Exactly. This feels less so, but in a very nefarious way. And this is not to lose a question that I was asking you about his priorities, but just to make this point, it feels less so in this way. If you attack the businesses that are supposed to be generating income, like the small burgeoning businesses that are really the heartbeat of this economy, then what are you really saying? It still is an attack on the individual, just from perhaps a different direction. So we'll talk about that. But Rama, yeah, can you really tell what, if there is one, what direction William Ruto's government wants Kenya to go in based on the finance bills that have been presented, and especially this one?
William Ruto, based on a combination of two things. So based on a combination of the tax policies he puts forward and the sort of spending habits that we see from his government, and not just the one he's running now, even if you go all the way back to Jubilee 1, Jubilee 2.
Yeah.
William Ruto, you know, talks about how there's an element of hypocrisy in all of the policies that come out, because the government will speak about how we want to empower the private sector. We want the private sector to take the lead on X, Y, Z. But at the same time, he imposes policies that make it more difficult for that private sector to grow, for businesses to hire, for businesses to have certainty around tax policy. And that certainty problem is one of the big ones that we often hear about. You know, you speak to FKE, you speak to Kenyan Association of Manufacturers, you have one set of tax policies this year, that changes to something else next year. That doesn't help. So for example, I remember last year, one of the things we were arguing about was the state wanted to raise taxes on, you know, electronic equipment that would be using for production purposes, cameras, mics, etc., etc. if you say you're the Silicon Savannah, right, and you want to make this a hub for production, why are you raising taxes, right? Then you can look at other things where, he hosts a whole climate summit in Nairobi, right? And he says, we really are focused on trying to make sure that it's easier for people to move around in a much cleaner way, right? But then he says all these lovely things on camera. Then you stop and ask yourself, okay, but if you and I today go into the market and we say we have a budget of, I don't know, 2 million bob, you want to buy a car. Do you have an incentive to go for an electric vehicle in this market today within that envelope? Because the reality is that most of us, if you're buying vehicles, you're going to be in that, sub 2 million-ish level.
I think you're asking a very, very, almost elitist question in this way. I'd ask it, do you even have an incentive to buy a token these days for electricity? Because half of that is it's gone. It's just tax. Well, anyway, I'm joking though.
But also, I think it's important that you brought that up, because it's a lot of double speak.
Yes.
Because the same EVs that you've mentioned are in the finance bill, right? There's some VAT that's slapped on it. Correct me if I'm wrong. There is something such as that. And at the same time, you see this same government saying that and this is something that we'll get into a bit later, supporting SMEs and small businesses. People can self-employ. And one of the biggest employers you'll see these days is it's taxis, sorry. So folks who are doing the cab business, that's a huge population these days. Yeah. But then now you have this document from KRA that is increasing the taxes that these folks are going to pay to acquire these vehicles in the first place.
That's a good place to start, Tom, actually. And I'm going to throw this to you, and then Justine and I will chime in. Current retail selling price recommendations from the Kenya Revenue Authority. Yeah. I think last updated in 2019, and now we have some recommendations. I watched, there's that YouTube video that Barack sent us. Yes. I've also watched a few other things about the CRSP, and it's insane. Mtua Probox is paying almost double the tax that he would pay last year on the same vehicle, essentially. And these are 2018 models. You're not even talking about the newer models. So you're taking to the outer limit of the age of the vehicles, that bracket that we have. You're taking it to the outer limit, and still that's where the taxes are difficult, right?
That's so true.
So Rama, if you were in charge of KRA and someone brought you this CRSP, and you wanted to be a more pro-people taxman, if there is such a thing, what would you do with that CRSP?
I'd bin it. To start with. Take the whole thing, junk it. Yeah. Because, to sort of go back to your original question, what exactly is it that this government, this administration wants to achieve with the spending plans they have, the finance bills that they're putting forward? It's literally just a case of trying to trap as much capital as they can in the hands of government, as opposed to leaving it where it's a hell of a lot more productive in the hands of citizens. And we can see that through 1,000,001 different policy examples. You want to talk about housing? There's 1,000,001 examples you can talk about there. So William Ruto, when he was speaking, when was it? Yesterday in Homa Bay? He talks about how, and even before that, when he was doing a handover of affordable housing here in Nairobi, he talks about how this is a defining part of his presidency, and this is a big policy achievement for him. Okay, and yet cement production and consumption is down. The number of mortgages in this country is still pretty low, right? Mortgage affordability is a problem, and if you look at how government tends to work, there's a lot of needless, pointless, expensive duplication of programs and services that we as taxpayers often end up paying for. So for example, to use housing as one example, if your stated objective is to say, I want to make it easier for Justine to get into the market, right? Go to a bank or a SACCO and say, hey, guys, I have a quarter acre somewhere, I want to build. And the SACCO, the bank should be able to tell her, sure, we look at your construction plans, you have an architect, cool, here's your financing, and it's in single-digit rates. And that has been a long-standing issue. When we were in KTN, 1,000,001 years ago, kids, just saying.
No, there was no need for that right now. There was no need to cut that deep. But anyway,
commercial break. But anyway, back then, if you went to your bank you're looking at a mortgage rate of easily 15, 16, 17%, right? So mortgage affordability was a huge problem. Fast forward to 2018. Finance Ministry, housing guys, they all agree and say, hey, we need to lower these rates. So to lower those rates, they put up something called the Kenya Mortgage Refinancing Corporation, KMRC, right? And KMRC's job is to essentially find as much low-cost capital as they can for the longest possible tenor, right? So 20-year, 30-year debt. And then turn around and go to banks and say, if you're going to give Justine a loan, a mortgage, we'll provide some of the capital in there. We'll guarantee some of it, right? And that helps to lower the cost, right? Making it easier for, even if nothing else changes, even if your income is the same, your take home is 100, 150 a month, whatever the number is, it makes it easier for you to afford that home, because if we stretch out the payments over 20 years, it becomes much smaller, right? It's easily digestible. So you already have KMRC that's working, right? And our viewers can check this for themselves. If you talk to your bank, you talk to your SACCO, I'm willing to bet, right, that your bank or your SACCO has told you, we have this offer from KRC, right? On top of that, you already have the National Housing Corporation, which, fun fact, predates this country as an actual entity. It's older than Kenya itself. NHC has been around for a really long time, right? If your objective was to really expand the supply of available housing, why aren't you putting more cash into NHC?
But that I think is one of the greatest mysteries of this country. Like, you have, anyway, umesema yote. Justine, before we carry on with Rama, I wanted to ask you, what to you is a pain point or pain points in this finance bill? And is there anything to smile about?
I don't know how anyone is still sane after what happened last year, because essentially what last year was almost kind of a negotiating tactic by Kenyans. They were like, we're just asking you to trash this bill because it's going to harm us. That was the basic level ask. It didn't need to escalate. It did need to get to where it got to, but there was almost like a dismissal of, you're not going to tell us what to do. And whatever with the braid-based government, or like whoever wants to stand on the red carpet and take photos.
Did I miss that? Ama niwe mispronounce ama that was a Freudian slip? Ulisema bread-based.
No, there's nothing like that for Justine. Definitely intentional. You can't revise that.
Yes. So whatever it is, they're kind of chopping it up between themselves. It's the same dismissal of the Kenyan ask. Because everyone is just, I don't know how people are still asking the same thing and being dismissed. I'll give an example of, one of the people I really follow on Twitter, I think his name is Brian. Brian went to a public participation forum in which the CS was there. And essentially he was asking, all of you are in here and are telling us to trust you, but like the driver is a thief. The conductor is also in on it.
I saw it. I saw that question, yes.
How are we supposed to trust that the direction in which this country is going to be beneficial to us? Where at the back, most of us are getting killed at the back. Like, that's the reality of it. It's not just the businesses, it's people too. Because when a small business dies, it's not just the business. It's someone's livelihood. It's their kids' education. It's their kids' health care, their own health care, their retirement fund. All of that is gone. It's just wiped out. So the realization that the ask is kindly make policies that align for us. And the answer to that question by this guy who used to know the smell of skunk was stopping corruption starts with you. And I'm like, how? How are you going to stop corruption? I'm not even there. I'm not being listened to. I'm not in the conversation at all. I'm literally outside. I'm like knocking at the window, asking you to do the right thing.
And nobody's listening.
And no one is listening. So to answer your question, I don't think we're even in this conversation.
Yes, this is going to be a one of those tough episodes, because I'm really trying to reach for anything that there is, like, that we can look at. And perhaps maybe even being a little facetious, in looking for something positive, right? Like within the finance bill.
Yeah.
And such as I might, I just don't find anything that, you know, it's like it gives with one hand and it takes away. So for instance, you're talking about mortgages, right? So they've extended, I think, tax relief to mortgages for people who are taking mortgages and people who are constructing. Sounds like a good thing, except the mortgage rate is too damn high. Banks have made it almost impossible to borrow, and so the market is still being crowded out.
And there's a whole other discussion around that, because what banks are doing now is there's a fight, and we'll see this playing out, especially as we get closer to the next MPC meeting.
Yeah.
There's a fight between banks and the central bank. So the term you might sometimes hear us using on air, or if you read our stuff from Bloomberg, is their rate transmission mechanism problems, right? Which is just a fancy way of saying, if the central bank lowers the rate, that benefit in that rate cut does not always immediately translate right, into the loans that you and I take, right? And there's a whole bunch of reasons why. Banks will say, look, our cost of funding is X, and it's informed by the fact that I've taken deposits from John, from Justine, from Tom, and I can't just give that money out at the rates you guys want me to give it at. Unless there's certain guarantees in place, right? The cost of funding question always keeps coming up. Central bank turns around and says, well, hang on a minute. You guys amongst yourselves, if you look at the interbank market, you're borrowing at, a relatively low rate. It's 9%, it's 10%. But yet you're turning around into the market. Someone comes to you for debt, and you're loaning them cash at 20%, 21%, in some cases even 26%. Because I remember seeing an offer letter of 26% last year, which was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It's nuts, right? And I mean, ultimately, the reality, to your point, Justine, the fact of the matter is, if we were being listened to, the thing that we'll be having a conversation around, especially with respect to what the Finance Ministry and Parliament is doing, would be to acknowledge that we can't keep spending money and borrowing money like a drunken sailor. The days when you could run a roadshow in London or Luxembourg or some parts of the US, go into the market and say, hey, guys, I need $1.5 billion. And you'd have multiple offers. Your order book would be like 5 billion in offers, and you could literally cherry pick the sort of rates that you want.
Yeah.
Those days are done. And unfortunately, what you would ideally see is a situation where the national government, for example, their total spending for the next fiscal year is around 2.5 trillion. Ideally, you'd see a serious effort to say, you know what, we can't be spending 2.5 trillion shillings, right, that we don't have. We need to be chopping this budget down to 1.8, 1.7, which in and of itself is a painful process, right? Because there's a lot of waste, there's a lot of corruption, which is what those guys are talking about.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of what else they call, the term you'll hear is structural rigidity in the budget. So what that essentially means is, when I'm making my budget for the next, say, 2-3 years, there's certain things I've already baked in that I know I have to spend money on for that period. Wages, I need to pay your salary, you need to plan, your pension is coming up, etc, etc. Debt. I've borrowed XYZ from Tom, I need to pay him back in 3 years' time, 4 years' time, whatever the case is. So there's a lot of those fixed expenses, interest, debt service, wages, overheads, and maintenance, that if you wanted to really cut them, it's going to be difficult, right? So the interest bit of it is complicated, but you can sort of work your way around it. The other bits would entail a politician admitting the very basic truth that you need to downsize the state, right? Because I cannot have 50 people on payroll, yet they're literally doing the work that can be done by like 5 guys.
Or 200 advisors. Like, people who've been hired randomly. And isn't it, I don't know if I should call it strange anymore, but for sake of argument, isn't it strange that John Buddy, who was on the other side not too long ago, like in not just living memory, but recent memory, talking about the very things that we're talking about today, that profligacy in terms of the way the state spends, corruption, waste, having these huge budgets that nobody knows how they're going to fund them. Like it's almost like magical or wishful thinking. Now becoming the defender of yet another, turn in this budget cycle saying the very same things. Tom, you know, you looked at you've been looking at the finance bill now since 2023 to 2025 now. To you, like, what's even a question that I should ask here? Like, actually, let me keep on Justine's train of thought. If we were being listened to, what are the things, the priorities for you that, you know, we should be looking at in terms of our budget?
Look, Kenyans last year are making so much noise, and I pick the most basic budget item, the vote for travel. Kenyans are making so much noise about it last year. So much that the president had to halt travels for a few months.
Yeah.
But then the controller of budget comes back and says that 1 billion is being spent every month on travels. In a country which has hospitals that are underfunded, the education system is in shambles, people are struggling to just get by, and we're spending 1 billion on travels every month. Now, if you think about that, it's a thing that Kenyans have been making noise for the longest time, but it keeps showing up the same way.
Yeah.
And then you have the budget committee chairperson, Mr. Atandi, saying that for you to downsize the expenditure on the president's renovations, it'll mean having a filthy presidential office.
Yes.
It just tells you to what lengths the government and its stooges would go to defend the bad decisions. These are things that people have been making noise about forever. I know that we've done an entire article on travel expenditure, but 1 year down the line, 2 years down the line, we still have it being an issue. The wage bill, it's something that people have spoken about for years. I know from when Rama started writing for Bloomberg, that's many moons ago.
Yeah.
You guys were still making noise about this ballooning wage bill in this government. But how many years down the line, the same thing is happening? Corruption. This same person that you speak about was the one sitting on the other side of the house criticizing corruption. And now he's turning the gun on Kenyans, telling, oh, actually, corruption starts with you guys. Yeah, you guys should analyze what the problem is. It's not us. We're not the problem. But then if you speak about advisors, I actually think you have to be, first of all, a thief. And you have to go to whatever lengths to defend what the president is doing and his government to make it into government in the first place. Look at the people who get into government. It seems like the script is so similar. You're this clean guy who was speaking for the people. And I'm speaking about the opposition leaders and every other person that you can imagine who's in any senior position right now. You're speaking against this thing that you call nasty, and this dirty politics of corruption. Then you get in, and the moment you get in, you switch up.
Yeah.
The advisors, that we've done enough about that. Moses Kuri is the best example about that. Tracy went on the ground, and you saw that he's eating from the same football fields that he was supposed to construct through another company.
Yeah.
And I believe this is the same thing that happens all over government. You guys can correct me, but I think for you to get into government now, you have to have your hands dirty in some way.
Well, I think that's true of many governments, but this one especially, that, lazima kuwe na kauchafu. But you've mentioned stadia, and it's a perfect segue into looking at some of the tax breaks that this finance bill proposes. The first one, obviously, being on people who are, you know, engaged in the construction of stadia. Justine, how many people do you know who construct stadiums?
I know a lot of people.
Oh, really?
I know guys on the inside. I'm joking. I'm joking. I don't know anyone who's ever built a stadium, but I have seen a lot of striking workers.
Yes.
I've seen a lot of water imitations where the project starts off so well, and then they have those chairs from Pizza Inn at the end of it, and I'm like, okay.
Chairs from Pizza.
Yeah, because the chairs are movable. The person with that tender, again, congratulations. Your life is really good, because all you have to do is get them into a lorry and then launch a new stadium. And Gladys Wanga, during the speech at the Madaraka
at Raila Odinga Stadium.
Day, was saying, oh, Homa Bay is going to be like the Cape Town of Africa. Nah, man. You're not going to be anything. There's no roads, bro. Like, what are you talking about? And I want to have faith in you.
Yeah.
But you people are not giving us any reason. Like, you had your constituents sleeping at the stadium from, like, in the middle of the night, all the way to sit through your speeches. And for what? Those people are unemployed. What Cape Town is that? Like, what is the point of mirroring other countries? actually you can't be like Cape Town because Cape Town has a big
That's
unemployment
what I was
problem.
about. That was what I was about to say. I was like, you know,
Yeah.
they didn't say which part of Cape Town.
Yes, it could be like the
might maybe
segregated
like Alexander
area.
or somewhere
The
where there are
Yeah.
problems, the townships or Cape Flats.
Yes.
You know. Now, but Rama, look, these tax breaks that are being proposed, I found that one on sports stadia rather strange in this way. Yeah? Because if you think about the people who are constructing large stadia in this country, it's the Chinese, right? By and large. So the CMAC that are constructing the Talanta Stadium on Ngong Road, Kasarani, etc. If memory serves, there were tax breaks on some of the inputs that they had a couple of years back, right? Now you give them tax breaks on construction of sports stadia, and these are government projects, right? I found, like, why are they struggling so hard to give these guys a second bite at the cherry when there are industries, literal, like, thousands of people in cottage industry that could do with actual tax breaks, that could then now get, you know, money revolving in both the local economy down in the counties, but also nationally. So again, it's really the question of who proposes these things, and what's the thinking around who should get a tax break and who does it?
There's the fascinating pair of articles that I think anyone who's watching the stream should read.
Yeah.
Ken Opalo's fantastic intellectual, Professor at Georgetown, and Judah Moore used to be Minister of Public Infrastructure, Public Works, I think, in Liberia years ago. And they've both written interesting articles on, I think it was Judah who actually put it quite well. You know, there's an ambition gap among African elites, because what individuals at that level in government think is a priority, right, is not always going to be in consonance with what is a priority for the bulk of the rest of us, right? Your average mom and pop shop, your average individual in the formal sector, we're just not the priority for them. And part of it is because, you know, to go back to Justine's point, for years and years and years, public participation has always been treated as a sort of, tick this box, hey, what's a maneno mingi, sign here, right? It's always been a sort of passing thing. Public input on a rolling basis, beyond, you know, remove elections on the picture, on a rolling basis saying, no, this policy does not make sense, has not really been there for a very long time. So our quote-unquote elites, if you can use that framing from Judah and Ken's writings, is that they tend to look at the world from the perspective of how can I maximize the amount of money I'm going to make here through proxies? How can I keep the conditions that allow me to continue, you know, feeding from the trough, right, to continue? Which is why, for example, you'll hear the Kenyan government talking about how we do not want to default. We do not want to default. It is a bad idea. It's going to really mess things up. And every time, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, I've become swung more to the train of thought that every time I hear someone in government saying, oh, default would be a terrible, terrible thing. I'm like, but things are already pretty crappy for the majority of Kenyans. So the only argument to be made for, oh, you know, things are going to be really, really bad is because if Kenya defaults, we can't service our debt, that means we are locked off from accessing a lot more foreign debt. And we then have to go cold turkey on spending, and you really dramatically have to downsize the amount of spending. And if you're spending a lot less, then I've got a much smaller incentive or much smaller opportunity to then say, see our budget, I'm going to make Tom my advisor, and then I'm going to add Justine on top of that, and then I'm going to put Nam over there. Those opportunities to just blow money disappear. And it isn't that, I mean, to go back to your point about hypocrisy, if you look at the, and what I usually try and recommend that people do is, don't just look at the finance bill, because that produces, you know, it'll tell you these are the taxes that we want to put in place. Look at that with the budget books. And I know they can be a bit difficult to read. You know, it's massive, like 1,000-page documents. But
now, don't worry, Justine is a big fan of, was it Lord of the Rings?
If you can hack Lord of the Rings, you can hack these.
You're not a Lord of the Rings, Nani?
I am.
Yes.
For the sake of
For the sake of the conversation. Me, I knew. I've always, anyway, so meaning that you can read those budget books. And anyway,
but one of the things you should always look at is, what exactly are you spending money on? Because for us to arrive at that, say for the number like I threw out earlier, right? Government says on a national budget consolidated basis, right? So ministries, constitutional offices, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
We want to spend 2.5 trillion shillings. They have to itemize that and say, we're spending this much on this much on wages and salaries, this much on airtime, this much on transport, all that jazz.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the 2024 spending plan, this was before, around May, June, right? When we were running up to the protests.
Yeah.
The amount of needless, pointless duplication that was there was something to behold. So leave alone the fact that we're allocating, 500 million shillings to the office of the First Lady, 500 million shillings to the office of the Second Lady. Nothing against them personally, but let's be frank here. I can spend 1 billion shillings way more efficiently on other things. It can go into healthcare, it can go into road construction, it can go into education, because there's schools out here that needs textbooks. I mean, kids, there's no rational reason to be spending that kind of money on the office of a spouse or someone we elected when there are kids in Turkana or Marsabit or Garissa or Njeri who are learning under a tree. True. Right? You can't justify that. But then if you dig deep into things like the budget for and this was last year's plan before the protests, if you look at the spending plan for the Deputy President's office, and you actually ask, okay, so what exactly are these guys spending money on? There were lines in there where they were saying, we're spending money on alcohol abuse programs. Now, anyone who understands the way the Kenyan government works would ask, hang on a minute, why is Gachagwa's office
Doing Nakada's work.
bingo, right? Needless duplication.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that layered in across government. In the same way that you could make a plausible argument to say, hang on a minute, if we have David Ndi, etc., on this National Social and Economic Council, you have these guys here. You've got a fantastic brain trust at Treasury. And I know it's slightly contradictory because here we are talking about the quality of policy being carried out there, but the individuals in Treasury who are really smart, right? They do some interesting work. The people in there with graduate degrees and doctorates who could probably do a better job, right? Why do we have this planning function in Treasury? You then have the National Social and Economic Council, and then you have KIPRA, right? The Kenya Institute of Public Policy and Research, who also do fantastic work.
Yeah.
At some point, it's not like we just have money to spend. Collapse everything.
So then it's not for a lack of knowledge that we are in the pit that we are in right now.
No, it's simply because our elites have chosen to turn the state into their own personal feeding trough.
That gives us a brilliant segue into everything else that we're going to discuss. That
Yes, actually very interesting that you say that, because I'm looking at open budget here, and for the 2025 budget, specifically the one that is just ending, we had government printing services getting recurrent expenditure of 767 million Kenya shillings, and then a development budget of 177 million Kenya shillings. They had a total of 944 million Kenya shillings for government printing services. And then the advisors that you're speaking about had 1 billion and 185 million on their budget. So that's 1.246 billion Kenya shillings on government advisory services only. Now, what are they printing for 944 million?
Justin, maybe you have some clues there, because the answer can only come from satire. I don't think that there's anything logical. There's nothing logical that they can have been printing for that
they're
amount of.
printing the money they're going to spend once they collapse this country. I don't know what they're doing. It's so crazy.
There was this hilarious incident. This was like, I think, a decade ago or thereabouts, where government put out a tender, and they were asking for, I wish I was joking, but I'm really not. They were asking for a tender to airlift by helicopter speeches for government officials. You remember this?
I remember that. That was crazy. That was crazy.
Speech. Yes. Speech that
this was like 1 or 2 years into Jubilee One.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. I remember.
So here's your speech.
Yeah.
And your flashcards that I can print.
Yeah.
I can literally put it on your phone.
Yes.
But no.
We're going to airlift that. No, but this was a time of like premium craziness.
Wait,
Yes.
I actually have a question. Whose mouth is this heavy that it needs to be airlifted from one part of the country to another just so you can announce things?
But
I'm airlifting you and Rezo's speech.
Yes, to go and make
to Mombasa
and deliver them.
Yes. to go and make the speech.
There was an actual tender.
Let me tell you, it was, do you know that gold rush in that we read about and the craziness that was that time. That was a time I think the government of Kirinyaga had, what do you call it, benchmarking on how to use Facebook.
Really?
Yes.
They went all the way to San Francisco.
I can't remember. I think they went to Rwanda or something, like, but they had a benchmarking.
Are you aware what Facebook is?
Yes.
Because you know these Gen Z.
Wait, there's
Ramashikayo, thank you. From one millennial to
Facebook.
no, man, no. Let us have this, my guy.
I just sit back. Okay.
So, guys,
at the moment.
guys, comments, huh? All right. So Phantom says, bro, and by bro, I guess we know who he means. Bro has no plan. He just wants to be a quote-unquote dynasty. Brian Anyuak, thanks for watching. He says, good discussion. Let's go back to the manifesto, which is an interesting point. Because when you look at the manifesto and then you look at what's happening in government, there's
It's actually called a manifesto.
Ah.
Hey!
come on. Right. For your next time. Yeah. I just know I was there in the room when that joke was created.
Yes.
Comedy Central.
Yes.
Next season.
Yes.
In wonder.
Kiben Duni says, on banks and borrowing, the finance bill had a clause about expanding into digital lenders that have low interest compared to banks. Pro-people policy, question mark, doesn't look like it. Kimberly Kimani says, that's where they will eat money, stadiums, just a tax break on choppers for last year. Who is flying all over us now? Tax breaks aren't about Kenyans. And Bri, so I'm not sure whether it's short for Brio or Brian or Brianna, but anyway, maybe you can clarify, says, Kenya and much of Africa rely heavily on government-led policies. Following a Keynesian approach with large infrastructure projects to create jobs, we need a free market approach. And I agree, especially to the extent of sports stadia tax breaks. How are you investing in the infrastructure for where a sporting event will take place when we have sportsmen and women who do not have player welfare associations, who are not funded, who, I mean, look at the mess up with what's happening with rugby right now, right? And rugby is one of the better performing sports in terms of organization, etc. How do you prioritize the building of a stadium before you prioritize the curriculum, sports curriculum, right? How do you prioritize that? And then on that, we've just, maybe that's where like another billion has gone from changing the C to an E in CBC. Like, I was like, yo, man.
What is that?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's this joke I did on my knee today where I was like, they went from CBC to CBE because CBD is taken by Sakaja's lungs.
That's a good joke.
No, that's a good one.
Right?
That's a good one.
I'm
Yeah.
very
So look.
The short version,
Yeah.
short answer to your question is in part ego. Because
Ego.
can you think about, okay, forget these, and I agree with a lot of the headlines that said, the president's basically giving us crocodile tears in his apology.
Yeah.
Can you think of a time when any politician, and a lot of these guys who are key decision makers now, have been either in parliament or in executive in one way or another for the last decade?
Yeah.
I cannot recall a time when they said, you know what, we were wrong on that policy. We messed up. Because if you're hosting, if you're committed, it's essentially the sunken cost fallacy all over again. It's essentially saying, but we promise we're going to do this CAF tournament thing.
Actually, on that, there is one occasion that I can think about, subsidies, right? But I'd say that was more for political posturing than
the fertilizer ones.
Not just fertilizer, but fuel subsidies, right? It was more for political posturing than rescuing the economy, because you scrap subsidies on the one hand, right? And then say that you're going to fix the fuel economy with G2G, etc., etc. It does settle down a little bit, and then you say you're not going to borrow, and then right now we're what, 803 billion shillings in the hole this year, right? Over the past, is it 9 months or something?
It's 9 months.
Right. So it's not. Yes, I mean it's true. They never say that they're wrong. Only if the other side is the one that's committing the atrocity or making the mistake. Hey man, Utangoja bro.
That
Si
one
tunangoja
is
laptops.
Eh,
Ya
those
watu
are-
hii unangoja gas. My friend
I
tutazeeka
think like
bana.
there's a button of like the
Yeah, yeah.
promises. It went from like in 6 months time the
Aye.
stadium in Wote, and then we'll give you laptops, and then the button went to the cooking gas, and
Yeah.
someone else is gonna find something.
New.
The way this government works is it's a crude way of describing it, but it's essentially government by Instagram. Because it's almost like the policies
Government by Instagram.
Yeah, because the argument is,
Yeah.
I'm going to go for policies or policy decisions that I can say, hey, I launched this, I launched that, I launched this, I launched that. But if you actually ask, is there any durable, meaningful change in welfare for people, right? To use income as the most basic metric. Are you better off? Do you have more money in your pocket today than you did 5 years ago? The answer decisively, based on this data, is no. Right? So clearly, the policies they're putting in place, absolutely not working. And that subsidy problem is still with us in more than one way. Because if you look at the breakdown for fuel prices, can't remember the exact one for last month, but there have been times early this year where they've said, we're still stabilizing fuel prices.
Yeah.
And we know from past experience that there have been instances where governments looked at, that fuel stabilization component of fuel pricing, which has now turned into this gigantic money pit that collects tens of billions of shillings every year. And they thought, this money can do other things. So, for example, there have been times when that cash has gone into funding the Nuclear Regulatory Board. There are times when it's gone to paying off Chinese debt on taking to build the SGR and run Kenya Railways. And Kenya Railways is a huge fiscal risk for us that I think doesn't get enough attention. Because this is a one company. Remember the time when KQ made losses of like 22.8 billion? It was 22 or 2021, forgetting which exact year. And there was a huge amount of criticism. You guys, how are you losing this kind of money? Does anyone want to have a guess at how much money Kenya Railways has lost in the last 2 fiscal years?
I'm guessing it's in the high tens of billions, because I remember there was a time that I was looking at Kenya Railways books, and with a view of it being one of the guarantors for the loans that we were taking. But how are you the guarantor for a loan that we're taking when you're insolvent? Like that's the thing. Like hauna pesa, and then now you're coming to say ni mimi nitasimama on behalf of Kenyans.
Okay, so last year, 50.374 billion.
Wow, I was off by like 40 billion.
And 50 points. So in essence, it's the equivalent of, because between UN and Moi University, well, let's use UN. UN posted a deficit of about 1 billion shillings in 2023.
Yeah.
So in essence, it's like 50 UNs.
Damn.
And it gets better. So remember, that's 50 billion in fiscal 23-24.
Yeah.
Right? The year before that.
Wait,
That was 1 year.
Yeah.
Year before that, 33.6 billion. So in essence,
83.6.
so we've torched, just through Kenya Railways, we have torched the better part of 80 billion shillings. And if you look at their revenue side, 2023, they managed to get around 37 or so billion. The year after, it actually dropped to like 23 billion. But they're spending, so essentially for every 1 shilling they can bring in revenue, they have about 2 or 3 shillings in expenditure.
And Rama, the dissonance is just ridiculous, and that's such a good example, because how do you have a loss-making parastatal being funded every year, and then you limit you limit carryover tax for loss-making companies to 5 years, right? When the break-even period for different companies is different periods.
And if you're running a railway,
Yeah.
your break-even period, for this project alone,
Yeah.
this is going to be, 10, 20 years plus, right?
Exactly.
And we all paying for it in 2 ways, because we still have to service Chinese debt, right, from the Exim Bank of China, and still provide subsidies to keep Kenya Railways operating, right? So you're getting whacked in like 3 different directions.
Guys, we need to move on to the next topic. I know there's still VAT that we needed to discuss, but I think that one's kind of like a straight shot. I want us to move to some of the more social underpinnings of why we are where we are. And to start with an example from Friday, right, where Rose Njeri Tunguru, while attending a function, I think that was being under the auspices of, it was at the Baraza Media Lab, but I think there was another organization that was running, it was a training, gets arrested in the middle of the afternoon, right? People asking why. Of course, the DCI don't say anything. It later emerges that she is being arrested and being held, and I believe up until this moment, Tom, I don't know whether you have any updates on this.
I could check.
Right? Up until this moment, at least given the information that I had before we began the show, still being held on that specific premise. And I'm trying to understand, okay, she's still being held. Yes. So is it under the Computer and Cyber Crimes Act, under the what is she being charged with? Because that epitomizes what public participation is supposed to look like. Yes. People are supposed to make it easier for other members or other citizens in the country to participate in the governance of their country. Yes. And Justine, I know you did a video on this, and I have to say, it not only was it, I don't want to call it disappointing, because we've been disappointed so much. I was exhausted I was like, now, this poor young girl, right, probably has never had a run-in with the state, spending an entire weekend having her mother come to Pangani to come and demand her release. Like, what were your thoughts when you saw Rose being arrested and held?
Again, just to echo what you said, it's exhausting. Yeah. And I think it's a deliberate tactic to stop people from asking the government what they're doing, why do you care so much what we do with your money? That's kind of the energy they're giving. Yeah. And everyday people have no jobs, they have no income. As Rama said, income for people has shrunk. Businesses are closing down. People have questions. They're like, what is going to happen to me now? What is going to happen to me in the future? Because I can barely afford the things I was able to afford, and I'm paying so many taxes. Yeah. So those are the questions that are leading people to take the measure to publicly participate in these forums in whatever way they can. Yeah. And there's a document by the Parliament of Kenya that actually encourages creative and innovative ways to publicly participate. So which means this is actually protected by the law. And this is something we spoke with Tom, I think last week, about how every single time Kenyans are finding ways to do the right thing, they're beaten down, they're punished for it, you're made to feel like you're doing something wrong. When the people who are on the other side, who are actually supposed to hold the line for due process, are the ones who are asking you to get a lawyer after the fact that they've arrested you, made you sign something in the police station under duress. Under duress, yes. So if all these things are happening, not just to one person, to every other Kenyan, it feels like the government doesn't want us here. It doesn't want us in our own business. But now where do we go? Yeah, exactly. Unless you're giving us a substitute country, which I'd be glad to go. It doesn't make any sense for you to refuse for Kenyans to participate in the policies that inform their lives, the things that end up harming or even growing them. Yeah. So if we don't get to voice our concerns, it's not going to end well, not just for us who are getting harmed daily, but even for the government itself.
Man, I feel you. Rama, you wanted to chime in.
One of the best examples I can think of that disdain, like that madarao, that a lot of our politicians have for the employers, because we are essentially the employers, right? That disdain. This happened during the press conference last year when William Ruto said, you know what, I concede, I am not going to sign the bill, right? That's a soundbite that everyone remembers. Do you remember what happened when they got into the Q&A? Right? Because there was a reporter who asked, was a lady, I don't remember what station she was from, and she asked, so now that you guys are withdrawing the finance bill, how are we going to finance development? And you could hear the mics picked it up.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
MPs laughed. They were like, but you
But
guys...
you guys are the ones who are withdrawing. Ah, it's
Exactly.
your fault.
Yes, it's your fault. Simlikata finance
that.
bill, right? That sort of thing. And here's the irony around, you know, the way Homa Bay was talking about how it's going to be the Cape Town.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. County Executive of Homa Bay last year got a qualified opinion, which, by the way, in Audit terms, that's a horrible thing. It's like, it's worse than getting a D grade. It's a D grade, and then your class teachers like, see me and bring your parents.
And bring your parents,
Oh,
yes.
Sakaja was so proud that they got a qualified.
qualified
He was like,
opinion.
oh my God, we qualified. And I was
For
like,
the
no.
avoidance
that's
of
not
doubt.
what it means.
No, for the avoidance of doubt, a qualified opinion is a horrible thing.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, a couple of things. Among other things, and this goes back to the argument we're making about there's just so much waste in government. So every time they say, oh, you know, we can't really cut government, there's a lot, cut public expenditure, there's a lot of rigidity. Here's one reason why they can. So if you look at, for example, Homa Bay government alone, statement of receipts and payments reflects the compensation of employees of 4.2 billion shillings, right? But that includes personal allowances paid as part of a salary of nearly 130 million shillings. And a lot of that was paid to 58 officers in the month of June 2024 as non-practicing allowances. That's a new one. I'm not sure what that is. I have no idea. Non-practicing allowances. But, and this is the best part, you know, the way they will tell you, accountability and security starts with you.
Yeah.
Did the management of Homa Bay County actually deliver any evidence to support what they're spending on? No. This is from the Auditor General's report. Management did not provide supporting documents to confirm staff eligibility for the allowances. So effectively, I'm paying Tom an allowance that he doesn't even qualify for. Never mind the fact that that allowance in the first place should not have been there. And there's a whole bunch of other things. It's the economic pain we're talking about. It also shows up in pay slips. So for example, again, just Homa Bay, county, this is on the county executive side.
Yeah.
If you're running payroll for a company, the basic rule is, if say for example, I know if I'm HR, right, all employees here, if I know Tom has taken a loan from a SACCO, a bank, your monthly deductions, right, cannot exceed, I think it's more than a third, right, of your take home, right? This is the county government of Homa Bay. Analysis of the payroll of permanent staff indicated that 831 staff in July 2023, 625 others in December that year, 831 more in March last year, and another 847. So if you put it in the chart, that's just going up like that. Received net salaries that were less than 1/3 of their basic pay. So what are they spending money on?
No, you know, it's crazy, and it's that addiction to loans. I remember seeing one MP's pay slip, and his take home was 1,000 bob. This is a person who earns 800. Yes, 1,000 shillings. I think 1,292. I was also doing some back of the envelope maths here. That's crazy.
Even my Fuliza is bigger than that. What?
Yes.
That's
I was doing
crazy.
some back of the envelope math to the statement you made about per diems, right? So it was 130 million, and most of this for 54 officers, right? So on average, per month, each officer was taking in per diem about 44,500 shillings, right? So, you know, maybe I'm being conspiratorial here, but maybe this is why the tax exemption for per diems has gone up from 2,000 bob in this budget to 10,000 bob.
We're probably not going to get taxed for that
Exactly.
next year.
Exactly. And think about it. You know, the government is the biggest employer. And by virtue of that, government employees would be the biggest drawers of per diems to be able to go and do their things, right? So if you're not taxing, and a lot of government employees subsist on per diems, especially mid-level employees.
Yes.
They don't touch their salaries. It's only on per diem. So who are you serving by doing this, right? I mean, there are a lot of things here, and the more you look at it, the more you're like, damn, man, this is really criminal, you know?
There's a lot of things with tax policy that just contradict the stated objective. You know,
Completely.
if you say you want to expand, you know, access to electric mobility, for example, you've been talking about this whole electric mobility thing for the better part of a decade now, because I think I can go back as far as 2013 or 2014 thereabouts, when there were finance bills that were proposed by Henry Rotich, when Henry Rotich was still in Treasury, and it was, oh, you know, we're going to cut, I think it was either excise or customs duty on hybrids, not even battery-powered electric vehicles, hybrids, going to bring that down as one way of encouraging people, nudging people towards more efficient means of transportation, right? You can't hold the Africa Climate Summit here and talk about the need for cleaner transportation, more efficient transportation, and yet it's only now that you're saying, well, we're going to think of giving, tax breaks on electric motorcycles or electric buses. But the reality is, for a lot of people, if you look at essentially the sort of transportation matrix, and there have been some interesting studies around this, most people in this country either walk, or you take a boda, or you take some sort of public transportation. But even then, it's only now, in 2025, that you're now saying, oh, no, we're going to implement this and turn it into policy. If you really were serious about delivering on that promise, these are things you should have done 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, right? And there's that enormous credibility gap that always keeps coming up every time we talk about, every time we look at government, because they will sit down and say, oh, we're expecting to do this much in revenue. So, for example, the numbers, when you look at them over the medium term, they look quite ridiculous. So guys in government will sit down and say, well, every year, and if you actually look at the budget policy statement, it's publicly available. Go to treasury.go.ke, you can find it there. They will have essentially what they call the fiscal framework. So what that basically does, it tells you, we're expecting to raise this much in taxes for this financial year, and the next 2 years or 3 years or whatever. And this is how much you're planning on spending. And the revenue lines are always hilarious to read, because this fiscal year, when the budget was originally read, the expectation was they're going to be able to raise 2.9 trillion shillings in tax revenue. They've chopped that down to 2.5 trillion. Yeah, and even that I'm willing to put money on, they're going to miss. But even if you use that fanciful number, right, that comes out, let's say, for the sake of argument, in some hypothetical wheat field world, they managed to raise 2.5 trillion shillings in tax revenue by the end of June this year. The expectation, if you look at their forecasts, they're expecting to be able to raise just over 4 trillion shillings in tax revenue by June 2029. So in essence, what they're saying is, between now and June 2029, we're going to be able to raise tax revenues by 50%. And any of us who are either employed, or you're in business, or you're trying to find work, your questions are going to be, if you're going to have a 50% jump over 5 years, you need to be able to see serious growth in the job markets now. Companies need to be able to expand, hire people. We need to be seeing a ton of capital investment coming in, both from within and outside the country. These 3 things are not happening.
And you see the answer to them trying to be able to make that gap by expanding the what do you call it, the tax rate on in income tax by like fully 5%, 7%, and you're like, how are you getting these numbers, right? Like, who are you asking? Like, man, I felt like just sending Peter, our finance guy, there and just telling him, angalia nini payroll yetu. I mean, surely, like, how are we going to justify these jumps?
But even that is the way the Kenyan government, the way policy works. It sort of treats businesses, and as a business owner, you know this. It sort of treats businesses like you're guilty until proven innocent.
Exactly.
Right? Which makes absolutely no sense. So, for example, there are instances where KRA will probably send you an agency notice and be like, hey, by the way, you defaulted on income taxes, personal income taxes, and you didn't pay in I don't know which year. Now, as an employee, you're going to be like, hang on a minute. I don't give you my check for personal income tax myself. My employer does. If the records are coming in from the employer and the payments are coming in from the employer, why are you sending that penalty notice to the employee and then saying, when on a holy pay?
It's pressure tactics. It's just pressure tactics, like pure pressure tactics, man. Look, guys, we've got so much to talk about, so little time, but there's 1 or 2 things that I really wanted us to wind down with. Today, there was an incredibly harrowing press conference that was held at Mageuzi Hub. Boniface Mwangi and Agatha Atuhaire recounted what happened to them in the middle of May when they had gone to Tanzania, eventually get arrested, and then get tortured. And first of all, I mean, I was getting sick listening to Boni talk about what happened to him and to Agatha as well when she had related the same. And I know you guys talked about this last week, but man, like, how did it feel hearing it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and seeing a man who we're so used to taking body blows on behalf of Kenya's democracy break down and cry, on live streamed, on a press conference? I don't even know what to say. I've even forgotten your name. Justine. Yeah, like, how did that make you feel? Like, what was going through your mind as you watched that presser?
I will not lie to you, I haven't watched it.
You haven't watched it?
Because there's a part of me, when someone tells me something very gruesome happened to them, my first thought is to believe them. Because why would you lie about something like that?
Yeah.
We've seen so many difficult cases in our news cycle. And to think that that guy with that ghost job, what's his name?
There's so many. You have
no, it's the office of the something minister of the prime cabinet.
Oh, prime cabinet secretary.
Oh yeah, I keep forgetting he exists. Yeah. That unconstitutional office holder.
Musalia Mudavadi.
Yes, he was busy on national television defending a government of outside, saying it's almost like, why were you there?
Yeah.
You should have, like, it's
you
very...
also had like Samson Cherargei saying the same, Farouk Kibet saying the same.
It's a talking point.
It is, exactly.
Yeah.
And for them, they're like, stick it to these guys.
And I'd say it, I would understand the structural rigidity of Sudi not being able to read. I would understand that.
Okay, I love how you threw that in your career.
I would understand, like, that's someone who you have to walk through understanding things. But for a lot of these other people, you have no excuse. I think Kenyans this entire year have been the foreign policy makers, the foreign policy upholders. They've been fighting for their own rights. They're begging people not to kill them. It's like we're doing every single job this government is supposed to be doing. So it actually just begs the question, what is your job?
What are you doing? And going back to what Kwame Owino said, sometimes, like, you think if government disappeared today, all of government, would Kenyans notice? That's like a really big question now. When they are there, they're such an impediment to our daily lives. Tom, you watched the presser, right?
Yeah.
And what were your thoughts? Like, if you're relating it to all of the things that you've seen and we've covered, especially from June coming to today, seeing that, what crossed your mind?
It's, how many hours is the presser? Almost 6 hours, right?
Yeah, about 6 hours.
But we haven't had a single thing from government. Yeah, we haven't had a single thing from government.
Yeah.
All those hours have passed. A Kenyan who has a Kenyan birth certificate, has a Kenyan ID, identifies as a Kenyan, fights for Kenyan rights, was narrating this very harrowing experience, and not a single government official has come out to defend him.
Yeah.
If anything, they actually have sent people in the comment sections to defend the actions of the Tanzanian authorities.
I saw that.
To me, that just shows that the political class does not care about Kenyans. It's nothing new to me, frankly. And we saw a time when a politician was saying that Kenyans don't have empathy. It's like, this is why. This is why Kenyans don't care if a politician's son dies. This is why Kenyans don't care if a politician dies. Because Kenyans go through this every day. Outside Kenya and inside Kenya. By the state and by other states. And as you've seen now, they've said nothing.
Rama, as a newsman, who's, aside from the stuff that we've seen on business, you've covered, everything from pillar to post. You've gone everywhere, covering all sorts of stories. Did that stand out to you as something that you very rarely hear coming from newsmakers, like that kind of narration of that experience? And how did that land with you?
It was painful. It was painful to watch. It was painful to listen to. There's no doubt about it. And in East Africa seems to be becoming a lot more repressive by the day. And it's not just a Kenya thing. It's, look at what's happened to Bobby Wine and individuals in his party. You've got the the head of the Ugandan military, the president's son, literally saying, "Oh, I'm going to kidnap this guy,"
and boasting about the torture of Bobi Wine's bodyguard
on Twitter.
Yeah.
And it isn't that the Kenyan government does not know that this is a sort of neighborhood we have. I mean, if you have Kizza Besigye being arrested here, that sort of thing would not happen unless there was tacit approval from authorities here. And on balance, it looks like the violence and intimidation is the point, at least from the perspective of politicians, because for them, it's trying to sort of swing the pendulum back in, know your place, right?
Yeah.
For you speak to politicians, and every single time elections come along, it'll be we are for the people, we're going to do X, Y, Z for you, we're here for you, blah blah blah. But the reality is that once the polls are done, people have been elected, the masks fall off, and for them it comes back to this expectation that you are here to serve me, right? You are here to meet my needs and my wants and my desires, not the other way around. And all this noise that we hear about, I'm going to do X, Y, Z for you, I'm going to do this, that, and the other for you.
Yeah.
It'll only happen to the extent that, can I set up a shell company to extract value out of the public purse, right, by being a contractor on this specific tender and that specific tender. That's pretty much it. At no point do we actually see a government saying, you know what, this isn't proper, you can't treat our citizens this way, right, and taking a firm line to that end. And the hard part, I think, is, looking at everything that we're dealing with now. I think it's Christine Mungai, when she was still running Baraza Media Lab, who put it this way. And she said, sometimes Kenya can feel like you're in a race where someone's basically trying to kill you. It's death by 1,000 cuts, right? If it's not this, it's something else. If it's not, you don't have water, or you're in water rationing, there's no power. It's, you work so hard to try and get your kid into a private school, and then, to get them out of CBC and CBE, put them into a private school. Doesn't
Only
work.
for them to wake up at 5 a.m. and to get onto a road that's not properly marked
and properly lit up.
And properly lit, to have an accident. It's true, it does feel like the Hunger Games sometimes, right?
And the hard part is trying to sort of see in the Hunger Games, how do you get out of it, right? Where's a point of hope? Where's a point of change? And it's a brutal grind. And we're fortunate to have individuals like, Bonnie Wangi out there, taking body blows for us 24/7. But at some point, if he woke up today and said,
peace guys, I'm out,
I'm done.
You know who would be saddest? All of those haters who say, now Melipwa, like, who are they going to hate on if Bonnie were to wake up and say, peace, I'm done?
And yet this damage hits every single one of us,
including them,
including those haters. It hits every single one of us. It's not. I mean, every single time people are like, but Kenya's not too bad. Look at some of the data that comes out from KMBS, and you actually ask, so what percentage of Kenyans in the formal sector actually make more than 100K a month? Any guesses?
Is it like 4% thereabouts?
It's around 4%.
Yeah.
Right? The bulk of us are not making money. We're not. That's a fact. We're barely surviving, right? And yet, when you, and I can understand the frustration. When you're trying to get things moving in the right direction. Like your Rose, you're trying to put up a website that says, okay, here's how. This is my objection to the finance bill, and this is why. You get arrested. Your Boniface Mongi, you're going down to TZ. You're literally going there to observe a court case.
True.
And we're supposedly all part of this Jumuiya experiment. And the response from a fellow Jumuiya state is to inflict violence on you.
It's the most dehumanizing, and should I say, it should embarrass you beyond that moment. That's why even when Boni wrote that statement on his Twitter, he ended with, I am Boniface Mwangi and I'm an activist, and this is my story. Because the idea of them documenting that whole event is to make you feel so worthless, so dehumanized, and so small and so powerless that you never think of doing it again.
Essentially, what they've done is they've tried to weaponize shame, right? Because no, and Kenyan society tends to do this to its women, right? You're just chasing men. Why are you here? Oh, you slept right to the top. Why are you wearing that? Pull down your skirt. That cycle of using and weaponizing shame 24/7. That's essentially what's being applied.
That's true. And painful as it must have been for Bonnie and Agatha to have come out so publicly and talked about that, I think that was the brilliance of the press conference, that it robbed them of this opportunity to weaponize the shame that they were trying to sort of like load onto them and put on their shoulders. Like, and the irony of all of this is that in Tanzania right now, it's CSO week. It's Civil Society Week in Tanzania. Tundu Lissu is going to be in the dock once again.
To their benefit, maybe their MPs don't know what civil society week is. You could explain.
Well, actually, you know what? I wouldn't, and I'm not hating, but I wouldn't put it past them, because this week, unless it was fake news, I saw a Tanzanian member of parliament ask that a device be put inside parliament to detect homosexuals.
Really?
Yes. If that's fake news, my guys, I'm sorry. But like, I was like, yo, man. I was like, okay, given the statements that I had last week, for real though, like, just go and look for it. I hope that it's fake news. But when I read it, I was like, man, you guys, this is just too fantastical of a story, you know, to not be true. Because who comes up with it? And then they came in that hard Kiswahili of theirs. You know, I was like, oh, okay. But you know what? This is not to say that all of Tanzania is problematic.
No.
I think there is, you know, to your point, Rama, and to your point, Tom, and to your point, Justine, there is a very serious problem with political elites in the region, right? In terms of recognizing what this moment, you know, what this moment represents, right? Like there's a very serious zeitgeist of this moment, which is awakening of massive numbers of people across the continent, and them starting to take charge of the opportunity that they have to question their governments, you know, to get proper leadership. And these are the you know, the fight backs of the same. Guys, we have to wind up now, but there's, you know, 2 or 3 statements that I'd want for you to get in with. Tom, I know you looked into CRSP quite a bit, and we started at the top of the show talking about it. Maybe just tell our audience a little bit about that. And why we should be paying attention to CRSP.
Well, to be frank, I don't own a car, which means I wouldn't know what this document was. Until this thing hit the headline, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
And then Thomas is like, I'm poor, leave me
alone. Like just echo what Mwalimu was saying earlier. But to the serious matters, actually, this CRSP that you're speaking about means car. Oh, geez, how did this just
current retail selling
price. Current retail selling price of vehicles. Every vehicle that is imported into Kenya or is sold locally, this document and its figures and its percentages are applied on it. Now, the last document of this kind was in 2019, and it was released by KRA. And in 2019, they were revising an earlier version of it. It was meant to change and anchor the cost of each vehicle that is imported or sold locally at a figure. So it means that everyone has a standard tax that they pay for a vehicle whenever they import it. But this time it's caused a lot of controversy, because in 2019 it wasn't seen through because of a court case that was won by the Car Importers Association of Kenya, CIAK. Now you'd, and Rama, correct me if I'm wrong, but the government plans to raise taxes of around 2.189 trillion shillings. Yeah, give or take. Well, that figure is very iffy because it's the Kenyan government you're dealing with. But they're closing revenue loopholes, like they call them. But this is just a nice way of telling you we're going to raid your pockets and all your bank accounts because we need more money to spend on printing services. But I want you to look at this as something that can have a small effect on you. And this isn't only for middle-class Kenyans, because it isn't true that middle-class Kenyans are the only people who own cars in Kenya. I'm looking at this from the lens of taxi drivers. And there's a majority of them. When we leave this place, a good number of us in this room, including the production team, including you, are going to take a cab home. But the cab that you take home today might not be the same cost in a year if this thing is applied. Here's why. So the Car Importers Association of Kenya looked at a few vehicles here. And this thing the government is saying is meant to increase fairness in the costing of all vehicles and duty taxes that are paid whenever a vehicle is imported. But let's take 3 examples of regular cars that you see on Kenyan roads. Toyota Passo, Nissan Vanette, and Toyota Probox. Ile ya mzae kutoka shambani ku, ile inafungulwanga boot alafu it's a shop in itself.
600 cows.
Yes, to quote Al. So the previous CRSP, the one that I mentioned in 2019 that never, no, the previous CRP in 2019, because the one that was stopped was 2020. Correction from what I said earlier. That one saw a Toyota Passo going for 1.4 as its anchor price, because as I said, this is the price that determines how much taxes are paid. Yes, and also there's a depreciation percentage that varies from 5% all the way to around 75%.
Yeah.
So if you imported a vehicle that was less than a year old, you're going to pay 5%, and it increases as you proceed. So for a Toyota Passo, it went for an anchor price of, the basic price was 1.4 million shillings. Now this proposed CRSP is going to make that 2.632 million shillings. Yes, for a Toyota Passo. That's an
30 minutes.
Yes, so that's going to see an 87% increase if this is applied. I'll go straight to the last one, Yawa Jomba, Toyota Probox. This one was going for 1.755 in the previous CRSP, the one that we see right now. But this proposed one will make that 3.356 million shillings. That's a 91% increase. And our Nissan Vanette, 2.33 million, and it will go for 4.669 million shillings. That's a 100% increase. It gets better. This is actually not from me. It's sourced from somebody who does imports. But let's look at the opposite of this, the higher end vehicles. Toyota Prados and TXs, the ones you see where Shimiwa, I hate that word, driving into functions with. Now this one was going for Land Cruiser TRJ, a long model number, but 2.7 liters. But it's a TXL. It has an engine of 2,695 or 2,700 cc. This was going for 7.741 million, according to the last CRSP. In this one, it's just going to increase by around 8% to 9 or 8.452 million. Now, the high-end vehicles are increasing by 8%, but the very basic vehicles that regular Kenyans drive on Kenyan roads to do business and to drive people around for income, those are increasing by 100%.
Hey.
The good thing is this is being challenged in court already, possibly in court, but the Car Importers Association of Kenya has, to use a better word, rebuked they implemented. Wamekemea mbaya sana.
I saw that language, and it's like someone, walishindwa hata with parliamentary language.
And rightfully so, by the way, because it says here, while the meetings were conducted, the final list appears to have disregarded critical input from stakeholders, especially regarding valuation methodology and market trends. The rushed implementation risks undermining the principles of fair administrative practice. Also, a word from people who do car imports is that this is good for people who run big showrooms, people who do big car businesses. But regular order-by-order importers, which is a majority of people, ngumu sana. And this association represents over 80 car importers. So, goes back to the entire conversation that we've had earlier. To whose benefit is this?
To whose benefit? And there's something that we forgot to discuss, which is what seems to be another super important thing about the 2025 finance bill, which is the expansion of the powers of Kenya Revenue Authority. Right? Like it no longer feels like the KRA, it feels like Big Brother, right? Like in real time, being able to access your accounts, track your, your chums, and I'm like, yo man, we don't even make that much,
That's because remember, this is, I think, like the second or third time they're trying to get this thing done, right? It's this sort of Leviathan approach of, apana, you have cash, give me money,
nani taipata,
exactly. It's that guilty until proven innocent approach, and every time I see stuff like this happening, it's really frustrating because, you know, if you talk to guys who've been in the tax policy space for the last 10, 20, 30 years, it's incredibly frustrating because we have real life examples from our economic history where we've managed to increase tax collections, improve imports, create entirely new business opportunities by cutting taxes. And the best example that we have here, and Amos Kimonya, if he ever watches this clip, this is, if there's one, granted, there are many things you can probably disagree with, but on this one, I will say that Amos Kimonya got this right. 2008, right, after PV Manenos, the finance bill that year, the Finance Act that year, dramatically cut import taxes on small displacement motorcycles, so anything with an engine less than 250 cc's. And we're in this perfect storm where you've got taxes being cut, and then India, small motorcycle manufacturers in India and China were also then ramping up. And the net result of that was, and I remember this because 09 or 10, you could literally walk into, that Nakuma Prestige, and as you walked in, it was right there. They displayed it, right? You remember this?
I remember.
So fast forward to 2025, the fact that today we have a business where, you know, you can find, you know, I don't know, say for example, I forgot this laptop here, right? Now can call a border guy and say, hey, chief, or even on Uber, here's a package, delivered to XYZ. None of that would exist today, right, without that tax cut, right? That entire business, the investments that have been made over the years in, you know, like the fast food delivery thing.
The livelihoods that it has created.
Exactly.
Across Kenya.
Because I remember driving, you know, down to Homer Bay years ago. This was 2016 thereabouts. You know, and every single little place you go to, you know, you go to Kadel, you go to Kandiage, you literally find guys who just borders running around. Kajiado, same thing. Borders everywhere. All of that started. You can literally trace a straight line back to that 2008 tax cut. And yet, all of these individuals we have in Parliament with access to world-class economic research, right? And people who know what they're talking about. They've studied here, they've studied abroad, they've worked abroad. Their argument is always coming back to this big brother idea of, no, the state knows better. Therefore, if we're not doing it, no one else is going to do it.
It's weird.
Such a big classroom. And like, I'll ask again, this is a question I asked earlier, and it was off air. You didn't get an opportunity to answer. With all these economic policies that are being made with Kenyans like an afterthought, do you think we're going to make it?
Personally, I don't think so. I think we're just, what we've done since 2021, 2022 is just kick the can down the road. We've postponed the hard decisions on downsizing government, right? We've postponed the hard decisions on asking ourselves, where's the waste, right? And chopping that down properly. We've postponed the hard decisions on looking at our public debt and asking, okay, what are the expensive bits? What can we refinance? We're starting to see some of that happen now. But is it happening at the sort of scale and speed that I think we need? I don't think so, because the refinancing that we've done on our external debt this year only covers like 20-something% of our interest payments, because every single year between now and 2029, we're spending something like somewhere between 200 and 300 billion shillings just on foreign interest, right?
Okay, so is there, can like the government renegotiate repaying debt and just be like, or like just we're not giving you money?
We can.
Then what?
It's because you see the tricky part is this. There's partly because we've borrowed so much cash externally, right? We are rated by S&P, Moody's, Fitch, right? And those three credit ratings agencies tend to have a fairly strict definition of what would qualify as a default. So for example, let's say I'm the government of Kenya, borrowed money from all of you, right? If I essentially say, listen, I'm not going to pay you guys unless you agree to this deal, right? That's coercive treatment, right? So that would be treated as a default, okay? Ideally, what should happen is I, as a Kenyan government, should come to all of you, put all of you at the same table and say, listen, I'm having problems refinancing this debt, okay? So, or rather, servicing this debt. So here's what I'm offering. I'll make you whole on the principle, right? If you lent me $1 billion, I'm going to give you $1 billion back, but you're going to have to take a haircut on interest payments, right? So either if I borrowed you, say, $1 billion at 10%, I'm not going to give you 1.1 billion back. I'm going to give you 1.03 billion, right? Or alternatively, if you're going to get all your cash back, we'll stretch out the maturities, right? So instead of servicing that debt over 10 years, we'll do it over 15, right? And I'll throw in a bunch of sweeteners along the way. These are not impossible things to do. And in some other cases, it's, like for domestic stuff, it's we've done this before. So if you see, say, a bond switch coming up, essentially that's the Central Bank of Kenya coming into the market and saying, I know Justine holds, I don't know, a 5-year bond, Tom has a 3-year bond, you have a 7-year bond. But servicing this one, next 3 years might be a bit tricky. So here's what I'm suggesting. I issue a new bond, 20 years in duration, and then you guys give me your 3-year, your 5-year, 7 years, I give you this 20-year one. Now what that does on my end is it stretches out the payments, right? So there's all sorts of interesting solutions that can be explored, but so far what government has done is essentially take the easy route. So if you think about the rate cap bill in 2016, what ostensibly Uhuru Kenyatta said when he was signing that bill into law was, I'm doing this because I think it is time for us to bring down the cost of credit for Kenyans. Cost of credit came down. Lending did not go up, right? Because banks simply said, okay, sawa, you've made it difficult for us to price our debt. So, we're only going to lend to people who will qualify for that 16% rate. Right? But here's what he did. Because now banks cannot lend to Tom, to Justine, to Namu. They'll be like, see, we're sitting on all this cash, but he needs to earn a return. Who are we going to lend it to? Government. Bingo. So they effectively created this pool of capital that government could then easily tap into, which is why Rotich and Co could afford to run those stupid deficits of like 8-point-something% for a few years before they had to bring them down. Roughly the same thing is happening with the housing fund, right? Because if you have the last number I remember seeing was something like 60 or 70 billion shillings just pulled up, right, in that affordable housing kitty. That 60 or 70 billion shillings that ideally should be in our pockets, that you and businesses should all be having the freedom to decide, I'm going to either save this, put into money market fund, reinvest it into the business, give my employees a raise, something of that sort. But it's literally just sitting there, being recycled into treasury bills, right? And the interest benefits from that go straight back into the housing fund. So effectively, they're self-dealing on our cash.
Hey, man. Hey, I don't know. I feel like we need an episode 2 for this. For this episode, we need an episode for the episode, right? Look, Rama, I'm gonna sort of like leave you to mull over some final thoughts there. But Justine, I know there's something that we've been really thinking about here, and it happened last week, and I've put my hands in prayer position so that you know what it is that I'm talking about. Where to Ambie, how you felt about Maombiza last week?
Oh, last week was prayer week and apology tour in the East African region, and they held like a national prayer breakfast, which is apparently funded by a bunch of frauds. Shout out to you guys. So when they were praying and apologizing, so let's just start with our neighbors in Uganda. So we are very
sorry.
People as
Basuguru.
Yes, the guy, he and his wife got together on a podium to apologize to the people of Buganda. So it turns out a couple that dictates together says their apology together. So they were reading their forgiveness statement, and Museveni did not say that part of I take responsibility, which I'm like, I absolutely wouldn't either. after all he had done, I think he was trying to be cautious. So I think he just skipped over that I take responsibility the way he skips over messages, right? Like that. And over here in our economic hellscape, we got the I'm sorry if I made a mistake apology.
I was like, if? I was like, if? Oh, okay.
Hey, it's exactly. See, it's a sorry. Oh my God. And a mistake is when Gachagua held the oath book upside down. That's a mistake. Maybe he doesn't know how the flag is placed, because we've seen it in different occasions where the flag has actually been placed upside down.
Yeah.
And they were just sitting there like it wasn't a problem. That's probably a mistake. A shoe hitting you when you're in the middle of ukisema sasa nitarashukisha gharama ya, that's a mistake.
Yeah.
But shooting people who told you to not pass a finance bill and abducting people and then saying, oh, we disbanded the thing that we did not have in the first place, that's not a mistake. That is lack of accountability. That is putting our, all our lives in danger. And it's not just the people that were abducted only. It's what's happening to Bonnie outside the country and no one even cares. It's what is happening to Rose Njeri. And if you allow the dehumanization of one person to happen, it's only a matter of time before it finds you. That you will never escape it. Even if you think you're this close to the government, we've seen people who work in government start saying, oh, they're after me, they're coming for my life. Well, you should have stood up for us when we were telling you this is actually hurting us.
Yeah.
Because right now we're not surprised because we saw it.
True.
And I think forgiveness doesn't matter if there's no justice or accountability. You can say all the ifs and the sorries and the mistakes, but it won't matter to us if no one is going to jail, if no one is being held accountable. We saw it with Baby Pendo, and we keep seeing it again and again and again. So, and then another one of those guys at the National Prayer Breakfast was like, young people, sorry.
Young people.
I apologize. I apologize.
So they took a minute. I was buffering. I was like, yeah.
It was like, young people should allow themselves to be mentored.
Yeah.
And I'm like, mentored by who? You people have shown us continuously how you do not care about Kenyan lives. You don't care about the things that we want to do. You don't care about the day-to-day that we experience.
Yeah.
How are you going to mentor people who you look down on? That's not going to work. So a lot of young people want very simple things. They want a job, maybe a car for boyfriend here for Tom. Yeah, to take care of their families.
Why is this guy side-eyeing me when he's
To take care of their families. To watch sports or a soap opera that was written by someone who's on drugs. We don't know. That's what people want. You want to be able to work and relax.
Yeah.
And a lot of us just want spaces to work, spaces to dream, spaces to live, and just stop being in this steeplechase of life that GOK has created for us. And we just want to prosper. And you guys can do this. I don't know why you're making our lives harder, your lives harder by not doing the right thing. But if there's anything you can do for the duration that you're left in power or whatever it is you think you're doing, just let us prosper. You've hurt us enough. Let us prosper.
Yo, good words, man. Anyway, fantastic thoughts. Rama, your final thoughts. I mean, we brought you here to discuss a finance bill, but what's occupying your mind? And in 30 to 40 seconds, can you tell the public about it?
Keep tabs on the finance bill, but don't read it in isolation. Keep tabs on that and the Appropriations Act, which basically says, because think about it this way, Appropriations Act says, I will spend money here. Finance bill is saying, I am going to tinker with the tax code like this in order to raise that money to spend. Those two need to be read together.
Yeah.
It's going to be rough. It's a grind. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Our fiscal problems run deep, and the individuals who would have hoped would have provided a measure of, sane thinking, rational thinking around how to fix these problems.
Yeah.
So far failed to do so. But nonetheless, keeping quiet will just compound the problems. So however hard it is, however difficult it is still important for us to be engaged. To quote Boniface Mwangi earlier today, he said we will not be silenced. And I think it is important for all of us as Kenyans to tell our employees, those ones in Parliament, those ones in State House, that we will not be silenced.
What a way to end the show. And thank you very much, Rama, for coming through. My final thoughts are slightly different, but I think related to this dumpster fire that we've been calling our country and our existence for the past couple of weeks and months. So I've been observing what's been happening in Gaza, and just how leaders from the West are now falling over themselves to come and say, oh, this is starvation, or this is wrong, etc. And for months, you know, almost over a year, we've been telling them, or, you know, they've been told by experts, by doctors, by the Palestinian people themselves, that a genocide is being committed, is perpetrated in Gaza by a regime that seems to want nothing more than to exterminate Palestinians. And my heart goes out to every Palestinian who either has a relative there or who is on the ground there, going through what is a controlled method of starvation. It's completely, like, it turns the stomach. But if I'm to think about the people of Gaza, I also think about the people of Sudan. And if you're putting Benjamin Netanyahu's regime, you know, solely responsible for what's happening in Gaza, then what responsibility does our government bear for supporting the RSF in a situation where the same thing is happening, right? Where Sudanese people are starving, they're being chased out of their homes, there's an active war that's going on, and evidence is starting to build of Kenya's role in facilitating one side of the conflict. I think, for me, this is the closeness that sometimes, you know, you live next to evil, that you don't seem to understand or seem to recognize its impact, perhaps because you're too close to it. And I just,
or it just seems very ordinary.
Exactly, it seems the normalization of evil. So there's that normalization within government circles, but then there's this, you know, there's this expression called the banality of evil, where people who are otherwise right-thinking members of society don't take a stand about certain things because, you know, it's not my job, or it's my job and I'm following orders, or it's a faraway conflict. This is not the moment for us to sit back and be, you know, distant to these kinds of things. Because as we have observed, and I think it's you who's just said it, right? If it happens to someone else in another part of the world, it gives license to someone closer to home to do it to us, right? And I'll end with the example of Boniface Mwangi, right? A man who, and I should say Boniface Mwangi and Agatha Atuhaire, right? A man and a woman who have stood for the people of Kenya, the people of Uganda, countless times. No matter what you say about their funding or their methods or what have you, they have consistently done something that has not been in their personal interest to do. And for them to have undergone such an ordeal, and for there to be no disgust, no repudiation of what is happening, more than that, not just there being an absence of repudiation, the exact opposite. Sam just sent us a press briefing from the office of the president in Tanzania. I'll just read some of it. It's in Swahili, so please forgive me if it's a mess, right? So the letter is addressed to the Bishop Josephat Gwajima, who had been very critical of the extrajudicial killings, abductions, etc., that have been taking place in Tanzania. Mind you, again, I said this is CSO week, right? And she said that, let's see, katika siku za hivi karibuni kupitia vyombo vya habari na mitandao ya kijamii umeonekana ukiwa katika mimbari ya kanisa ya Glory of Christ, ukitoa mahubiri yenye mwelekeo wa kisiasa na nia ya kuchonganisha serikali ya wananchi. Vitendo hivi ni kinyume cha sheria ya jumuiya sura ya bla bla bla, vinaweza kuhatarisha amani na utulivu nchini. Basically, she is pillaring a member of the cloth for criticizing what is abjectly obvious, that there is a problem in Tanzania. And this man's church is about to be closed, right? It is about time that we as citizens really start to think about the nature of our democracies here and the kinds of things that have been happening and the banality of evil that has, you know, swept across the globe, and start to say no, right? On the finance bill, we leave you Kenyans to debate it, to think about it. As Rama has said, also look at the appropriations bill and figure out what is best for us. But we shall continue here at the big picture to talk about these kinds of things and to hopefully give you as big a picture of what is going on in the country. Guys, I can't thank you enough for this opportunity to discuss the finance bill and everything that we've discussed. Rama, thank you very much for coming through, especially on short notice, because this is a guy that I picked up the phone on Sato and I was like, yo, man, can you come through? And he was like,
when Namu calls, you pick.
Umesikia?
Then when you have time, sure.
Wacha kuni blue tick. Kama Rama naweza chukua simu sembuse wewe.
I will say nothing. If I speak, I'm in trouble.
Very good. Don't speak. Yeah. Justine, great to see you after 2 weeks. Yeah, my ego had grown a bit big, needed some deflation. Right? Yes, and I'm staying humble. To the people who are online, 1 or 2 comments have come through. Rama, someone very complimentary of you. Rama is one articulate and learned journalist. Oh, you've responded to him. Okay, sawa. Kumbe you were in the ninis. All right. Sawa. And Phantom says research iko lakini kama parliament imejaa watu hawajasoma. Now in reference obviously to your comments. But you know, this has been a great episode. Hopefully it's helped you understand the ins and outs of the finance bill. Guys, thank you very much for joining us on The Big Picture. We're on every Monday, live on YouTube, live on X. We've been trying TikTok kiasi, but bado hatuja karabati vizuri.
Oh, but Tony is doing his thing.
Oh, Tony, oh yes, of course, with the cut downs in Nini. Yeah, so you'll be seeing us wherever you're on your socials. Thank you very much for joining us this evening or this morning from wherever you're watching us. My name is John Alanamu. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Back then, lending was very strict. With time, we have seen access to credit made easy.
Professor is the way to go, guys.
Zenka Loan App.
Technology has brought us money close to us.
Juu ni easy to access, haihitaji guarantor.
Zile terms zinakuja ni pages mingi. Utascroll tu mbio mbio, uclick agree and continue.
Unapewa wiki 2 ya kurudisha au kuongezi muda.
After 5 second message nyingine, after 10 minutes message zilikuwa zinafanya mtu anakuwa uncomfortable.
Sasa hivi unapigiwa hata unaweza receive. Nataka nitoke mahali hata uwezi chukua simu ina hangi ilipuke.
Sasa umejua ukiwa na mtandio, wakati ule walikuona umejivaa tu kawaida, ukiwa na mtandio hawezi jua ni wewe.
Back then, lending was very strict. With time, we have seen access to credit made easy.
Professor is the way to go, guys.
Zenka Loan App.
Technology has brought us money close to us.
Juu ni easy to access, haihitaji guarantor.
Zile terms zinakuja ni pages mingi. Utascroll tu mbio mbio, uclick agree and continue.
Unapewa wiki 2 ya kurudisha au kuongezi muda.
After 5 second message nyingine, after 10 minutes message zilikuwa zinafanya mtu anakuwa uncomfortable.
Sasa hivi unapigiwa hata unaweza receive. Nataka nitoke mahali hata uwezi chukua simu ina hangi ilipuke.
Sasa umejua ukiwa na mtandio, wakati ule walikuona umejivaa tu kawaida, ukiwa na mtandio hawezi jua ni wewe.
Back then, lending was